everybody, it's Against Everyone with Connor Habib. I am here with my friend Dave AUPEPE from Gang of Views. I'm so excited. We're going to be talking. He's going to play some music. If you like the show, and even if you don't like it, or if you're new to it, please consider supporting it via my Patreon. It makes a huge difference, and it's patreon.com/Connor Habib. When you pledge to the show, you get cool stuff. You get show notes, you get extra episodes, mini episodes. You can get conversations with me depending on what level you pledge at. I also have a book club that you get to be part of, and we get to read philosophy stuff, which Dave, here.
I'm super into.
Yeah. So please do consider supporting the show. Patreon.com/Connor Habib. It makes a huge difference. And also, if you're watching the show, remember you can always listen on iTunes or Stitcher or whatever, and vice versa. All right, Dave. Here we go. Hey everybody, it's Against Everyone with Connor Habib. I am Connor Habib, and with me is my friend Dave AUPEPE, who is here from...
You nailed the pronunciation.
I did?
There you go.
Fuck yes. Frontman of Gang of Views, which is one of my favorite bands, and probably yours too, which is why you're listening to this show. So I met you... Let's start
5
there.
years ago almost.
Yes, right after I moved to LA, and it was because I go into these cycles of like trying to find music that nobody else has heard of, and that can gratify me as like I'm not listening to the same shit again and again. And there was this website called Maps. Right? Was it Maps or New Music something?
Something like
But they chose your song. They did like
it was one of our earliest demos too. So
right on. It was and it was awesome. And it was it Strange Diseases?
It was a Sudden Light, I think.
Oh, it was a Sudden Light.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was the first demo of that song that we recorded for an EP.
Okay, right. Yeah. Before you added the like sort of Lion King chanting in the background. But anyway, so I heard that song. You guys came and played in LA, and I tweeted. I was like, going to see Gang of Views, who wants to join me or whatever. Nobody came to join me, but then you guys were like, are you Connor Habib? And I was like, what? No,
because we read your article, and it was like, and then we read a whole bunch of your writing, and then we realized that we had a friend of ours who'd seen your movie.
Oh,
that's how I was like,
oh, right on.
I was like, that was kind of a cool thing. I was like, oh, this guy. And also, and like, I think we all, well, at least I did. I identified very closely with a lot of your views on basically everything. So that was like. That's
why I really like you, because you agree with me on everything.
Yeah, that was 5 years ago. That was one of our first. It would have been 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah, it was probably our first trip to Los Angeles. And we played at the Echo.
Yes.
The Echo, yeah. So
yeah, and
we've known
I think
each other for a really long time.
I think the thing that's like really been heartening to me is every time you guys come back, it's a bigger crowd, it's a bigger audience, and like because I was seeing how you guys were growing in Australia and other countries, and I was like, man, like I hope they get huge here. And it seems like you would be a band that's huge in the States, right? But now it really is starting to take root in a real way.
Yeah, it's super weird. It's like, I think it's like a second album thing. Maybe the third album might manifest in that, but it's like I never thought much of our chances in the US because I guess the market is so fucking big here, and it's all pretty diverse, and really the only way to get to the top is if you kind of like have a lot of radio play. So not even the press can break a band in America anymore. So we're just kind of like shrugged our shoulders, and I think the first time we ever tried to break into America, I was going through kind of like a life breakdown. So that kind of halted things for a couple of years. But I think now I'm in a better place. We're all in a better place, and it sort of seems to be happening pretty well.
Good, yeah. So I want to talk about, we'll talk about the breakdown later. Yeah, we talk about both our breakdowns. All right. But I think, and that really is something I want to go into in this episode, is just the sort of intensities of mood and depression and all that kind of stuff. So let's go there, man.
There's a lot of that with me.
Okay, yeah, me too. Let's go there. Yeah, and I'm way older than you, so like... Man, I got bad news for you. It just keeps fucking going.
I'm
But the thing is, first I wanted to talk with you about, you've said in a few interviews, because I was like, doing some research on my friend, really bombastic, stupid bullshit. Yeah. But
that's so weird. That no, it's just so weird that someone can do research. Like, like the fact that I've said things that exist on the internet that I probably either regret or don't believe anymore.
And now you will be held to forever, whether you believe in them or not. That's the thing. Nobody can change their mind. It's like once you say something, you're like, yeah, I thought that yesterday. I don't think it now.
It's fucking weird. It's like, yeah, well, you said back in 2009 that fucking the Beatles were the greatest band ever. I'm like, well, now I think fucking the Beatles are the second greatest, but it's like, it's like
I can't. You're really shattering my view of you right now.
It doesn't allow people to grow. Which I understand.
No, but there was an interview, and actually a few, where you said, I feel like rock and roll needs to die, right? This is something that you said, right?
I still believe that.
Okay, yeah. And I wanted to talk about why, because you made that comment, but no one's like, yeah, tell me more about that. Everybody's like, oh, right? Yes, I agree. The death of rock and roll, right? And it's something that a lot of musicians say about the traditions that are before them, right? And I understand it. Now, on the other hand, I want to know, die, why, and then what in its place, if anything, and also is it, because when I hear something like that, when I think that something needs to die, some cultural trope needs to go away, I feel like it needs to die into me and in me. I feel I need to get past something, recreate it myself.
Yeah, of course.
And it's like in some ways just shutting the noise out and creating a silence so I can create,
or recreate something.
Yeah,
it's a sort of thing. Like, I think we always forget that music, especially in highly developed, highly capitalistic countries, things like art tend to cannibalize itself and eat the previous thing, and we burn the idols while also kind of deifying them in a sort of reverence. Like, it's really interesting how rock and roll for some reason missed that memo lately. No, but it's super weird because I think there's such an intense reverence for things of the past without recognizing how much the past needed to grow and how much it needed to be changed. And it's I think now, instead of looking toward I think rock and roll, instead of trying to be outward and trying to be ambitious and trying to be trying to really speak to the heart of people, I think rock music sort of found weird little complacent niches to kind of sit and fester and not change. And that's why I think the cliches of rock and roll need to be fucking abolished, because it's not the time or place to glorify addiction, to glorify
I see.
You know what I mean? It's one of those things. It's not the time to do that. It's actually time to make changes in the world that are inherently they're inherently progressive and forward thinking and maybe better for humanity than the past decisions that rock and roll was kind of making. And also that's just one side of it. But also just the fucking shit just needs to die in order to be reborn and brought back to life by people who deserve to bring it back to life. Have the sort of right caretakers of the art form. If you have the right people tending to it, raising it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, we had our fun with fucking the 80s and 90s and Guns N' Roses and Pavement, but it's kind of no, but you know what I mean?
I love that those are the two. Yeah. I've never heard those two in the sentence next to each other, but you're right.
Those are my benchmarks.
Sure, of course.
In terms of what the meaning of rock and roll was. If the 80s were that era of excess and glamour, and the 90s were the era of self-awareness and a kind of anarchic response to all that commercialism. I mean, you talk about Nirvana, I'm talking about Pavement in that regard.
Right.
So I think in order to stop trying to cannibalize prior movements and prior moments, I think rock and roll does need to die and be resurrected by people who are maybe better spokespeople for what the new kind of rock and roll needs to look like. Because
I mean, I think of it as like a being, this is a being that we need to tend to, that has something that, but But I do think, you know, so I had our friend Mish Barbara Way on the show, right? And her
from White Lung, yeah.
Yeah, from White Lung. And
cool.
so her band is great. Very different band than yours, right?
Super different, yeah.
But her whole thing is like, I want to feel threatened by when I go to a show. I want to feel fucking threatened, right? And so, but so the difference is like, I think that that's true. I think that there's like an essential part of not just rock and roll, but a lot of art that, not always, but how are you going to be threatened? And there are different ways to be threatened. It's
retreated to a place of safety and security, and like,
yes,
you know, it's like sort of a weird thing. Like I don't know anybody who went to a hardcore punk show hoping to feel like they were safe. It was kind of like,
right, or a horror movie or
exactly,
whatever. But you want to, but different people feel threatened by different things, right?
Yeah.
So you can bring in your music the threat in a different way that maybe some other, and the threat meaning like, because when you're talking about what it needs to do, like how it needs to bring about some sort of change, what it could do in the world. Yeah. To me, it's like you'd have to make people feel uneasy. You'd have to make people feel destabilized, right? Yeah. But you're doing that in a different way than say Mish is. With
of course.
music,
And I think there's an element of like how you intend to confront the world and the way, and I think the methodology by which you confront people, like in those reports. So I like the way that I choose to do it is by drawing attention to, to real shitty stuff inside myself and trying to find things that bond and unite us in a uniform human experience. I think that can be a confronting reality, because when you realize that someone, you know, who plays and sings the guitar also had numerous like suicide experiences or had addiction problems or, you know, whatever. Like I'm talking in my experience, that can be quite a confronting reality. And a lot of the time in whatever mainstream rock and roll tends to look like, if there is such a thing, it does tend to tack on to little underground flakes of that and then exploit it for what it's fucking worth, and kind of like, and then it metastasizes into a thing that feels really inauthentic and feels really like not real, and doesn't in fact confront people but keeps them comfortable, keeps them like reaffirming their place in the world as someone who is okay to be unchallenged. So what I'm saying is like bringing that sort of sense of confrontational art to a broader cultural setting is kind of like an important thing.
Yeah, and I mean, interestingly, like there's a way in which, so you're talking about suicidalness, cancer, especially with the first album, all these sorts of things. There's a way in which people could feel comfortable with those, right? Like they could be like, oh, you know, I mean, this is sort of like this gravitation toward my voice gets to be heard because I'm a victim, right? But that's not what you're doing. Like, you're actually just sort of chronicling difficulty, and also, I think, in some ways saying the difficulty doesn't really go away. It doesn't stop. It doesn't end.
You literally just have to learn how to transcend and overcome. Like, that's the whole thing. I think the first album was about, you know, there was a real resignation to the fates there. Like, there's a real, like, cancer fucking sucks and this shit's terrible. And, you know, addiction sucks, depression sucks. And this is just a reality here. This is a persisting reality in the life of like a human being. Yeah. Like, for lack of a better word, it just exists. It is just there. It is like an ever present. Like it has the value of zero. That's where it starts.
Right. It's everybody's lives are filled with these intensities.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. But I think that said, I mean, there are some intensities that are more intense than others, or take a different cultural space than others. But I don't think you're like, I never listen to your music and think, okay, so first of all, I'm a fan of like late 90s, early 2000s, like emo music that is about, in some ways, luxuriating in heartbreak, luxuriating in pain or whatever. So I like that music, even though it does that, but I feel its time has passed in some ways. But you're not doing that. I never feel like you're kind of leaning back, and part of it is the way you play and the way you sing, where it's a confrontation. It's like you're representing or embodying those problems in some way and just putting them there for people to see.
It's all about trying to embody a single, like I said, a single unifying, uniform human experience. It's try to be, I suppose, a canvas for people to paint all their most exasperating, horrible moments or their great elations. And I think by using hope as the linchpin of this whole canon of my work, hope being the the defining kind of anchoring factor of what we do. I think that's the way that we're able to kind of like alleviate complacency in what we do artistically. And I think there's like I have trouble wallowing in too much misery or too much like sanctimony or too much sadness in a song for too long, because I think I have it like it's the linchpin for me. It's that element of hope. Like I don't want people to feel like they are always going to be victims of their circumstance, but more or less like erring on the survivor side. We can survive circumstance and overcome and transcend. And I think every great artistic movement that came about that influenced me was a reaction to some horrible like socioeconomic problem or some political problem or some personal problem in a group of artists or an individual.
I mean it's so someone that I like who is also extremely problematic in some ways or whatever is this feminist writer Camille Paglia, right? And she says,
I've heard of her,
So there's especially right now in America, there's like this love-hate relationship with her because she's kind of been pulled into this like field of like Jordan Peterson and these sorts of people, right? But she's really super intelligent. She's been doing it for a long time. She's an art historian, but she has some problematic political views as far as I'm concerned. However, one thing she says, which I think is really beautiful, she's an atheist, and she says, all art comes from spiritual longing. She's like, all great art comes from spiritual longing. I'm an atheist, but for great art, it still comes from spiritual longing. And it's interesting because in your music, you push back on religion in a lot of ways, especially, in the first song I heard, right? But you are still... It's still that longing is there. That spiritual longing is there.
I mean, I think this is so strange. I've been going through like I've been renewing my love of U2 lately. And I like it's like
is that because I told you sound like Bono on my couch?
No. It's because but like I think I've modeled so much myself from guys like Bono and Bruce Springsteen and shit like that. And I think it's like. The pushback against U2 is so fucking extraordinarily insane to me, because like so many people shit on U2 for the past like 4 albums that they've done, while also reinforcing how great their first fucking 5-6 records were, because it's so writer approved or like liberal arts approved. It just seems so strange to me. And I think the reason why I gravitate towards U2 so much is because of this sense of Christian identity being like forced through the funnel of rock and roll, forced through the funnel of social justice, of politics, of philosophy. And I think like the greatest thing for me to do isn't to tear down the idols that were built to be iconoclastic against Christianity, but it's almost to like explore the avenues that I haven't explored within Christianity and talk about things that aren't talked about in fucking mainline Christian circles. Like, what do you do if a child dies? What do you do when someone that you know or you feel like killing yourself? What do you do when someone's got cancer? What do you do when when horrible circumstance force people to do miserable, terrible things in places that don't have the kind of security and luxury that we do? Like those questions aren't necessarily answered within the confines of the Christianity I was brought up in.
Right. And well, that's what I was going to say. It's like, what if God can't answer those questions for you? And that doesn't mean, I'm not speaking for you, but that doesn't mean that you have to become an atheist simply because God doesn't answer the question. What if God can't answer the question and you decide to stay Christian, or the Christianity still runs through you?
Or any kind of faith based.
Yes, right, exactly. But you have to you have to respond with a different technique of answer, which is, like you're saying, rock and roll or philosophy, which after all you could include in your theology if you wanted to. Like, well, these are faces of God that might have an answer that like prayer doesn't, or the Bible doesn't, or whatever.
Well, I mean, it's we talk about problematic writers. Charles Bukowski once said, "When the spirit wanes, the form appears." Okay,
when the spirit wanes, the form appears.
And I think that's a really beautiful, beautiful line from a problematic guy. But the line itself is so beautiful, and it informed, do not let your spirit wane.
But spirit, he meant alcohol.
Alcohol, he probably meant like when the absinthe wanes.
Right.
But I think this notion of the idea of spirit. I mean, not like Hegel's absolute spirit necessarily, but the idea of like careening towards some kind of fulfillment of like the ness, the something inside that is unconnected to anything material on the earth, but seems to always be looking and longing. I think every every person on earth, be it, whether they're fucking atheists or they're, you know, whether you're deeply, profoundly Catholic or something, is still looking for something. Like there's the element of searching, you know. And I think Viktor Frankl in Toward a Meaningful Life, he took the Kierkegaardian side and said that, you know, man is inherently looking for meaning. Like I think a lot of what I do is sort of trying to translate that into music, trying to look at what is it like when humankind, when women, men look for meaning, when people look for meaning. You know, and I think in terms of like our spiritual awareness or our spiritual search, that's kind of the crux of what a lot of what Gang of Youths and what I've sort of been looking for. And I think all the music that I loved is always searching. This has this real like unsteadiness, this real like pace toward it, you know?
Yeah, and I think that one of the really interesting questions is not just like, what do you find when you look, or what do you look for, but how do you do the looking?
Yeah.
All right, so now that we've been talking about rock and roll and its death, and I think that you should play one of your songs. And so what are you going to play?
I'm going to play a song called Persevere.
Okay, from your second album.
Second album,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
The long one.
Go Farther in Lightness.
Go Farther in Lightness.
All right, great. I'm going to get out of the way and let you play this. It's a fucking awesome song. All right.
Got to kiss your head, yeah, me. And the call came the week I got divorced. I thought I had a real understanding then of loss, but I didn't know the things that you were gone. So I'm tired of trying to find some sort of meaningful thing, of making sense of such unspeakable loss. But as I'm staring at you folks, the sweetest people I know, I get a glimpse of what it is to be strong, just holding hands and sobbing with sunglasses on. 'Cause nothing tuned me in to absurdity as fast as a gravestone with a name of a baby that has passed. I used to want to be important, now I just want to be alive and without fear. You got to persevere. Count the times I've read on heaven as an opiate invented by the weak. 'Cause there's an argument I hate, and I'm content to love the face, but it comes up a lot with them he's dead and me. And I'm shotgunning the car and we're just shooting the shit, and predictably the talking turns to God. So I throw him 40 lines, how I don't think he exists, or he just smiles and takes a dignified pause. Says it's okay to feel unbelievably lost, but God is full of grace and his faithfulness is vast. There is safety in the moments when the shit has hit the fan. It's not some vindictive motherfucker, nor is he shitty at his job. What words to hear. And I'm a mess by now, 'cause nothing tuned me in to my failure as fast as grieving for a friend with more belief than I possess. It's not some disembodied heaven, he assured me, then he laughs. And he says through tears, you got to persevere. 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 And I live hard cause I am scared that I won't mean anything. So now I'm praying to the ceiling, to the windows and to the walls, against a sudden sinking feeling. There's nothing there at all, and I still I persevere. I persevere. I persevere. I persevere.
Hey, welcome back, Dave.
G'day, Connor. How you going?
So if you're listening to this episode of the show, you may notice no difference. If you're watching, you might. I don't know if my face is showing or Dave's face is showing because we had a little mishap. Which
I take full responsibility.
No, it was.
I had a mishap. Connor's going to try and make me feel better, right? But like he's like, oh, come look at this on his computer, and I walked, and I've got like gigantic feet, obviously.
He's a big guy.
Yeah, and I stepped on the cord and the camera fell, and now the fucking screen isn't working.
So we can't see ourselves, which
it's entirely my fault that this episode looks bad.
Well, I just want
if it looks awesome, it's entirely my fault.
In any other era, we'd feel fine, but like not being able to see yourself as you do something,
yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's horrific. But I'm sure we both look great. That's okay.
I'm like horrifyingly embarrassed.
So all right, so we're just gonna check this later. If it's bad, well then I'm going to replace this whole section with like Ken Burnsing of like Dave on stage and my movies.
I feel like your movies are significantly more entertaining than me on stage.
Yeah.
A true story. When I felt like I felt bad because Connor had seen my work and listened to my work, but I'd never actually seen one of his movies. So I watched one of your movies.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, it was the
Which
first
one was
gay
it?
porn I ever watched. I don't remember. First gay porn I ever watched.
Oh, it wasn't memorable.
No, I
one
just
you ever
remember the
watched.
name. You've been in like 350,000. But I was like, Connor Habib, and I clicked the first line.
All right, so let's talk about the song real quickly. Let me do the thing that everybody does. So why don't you tell me a little bit about that
What's your
song?
inspiration,
Yeah.
man?
Where'd that song come from?
Actually, one of the saddest things that has ever happened. Look, I've dealt with like a lot of death and disease and shitty stuff. I think a lot of people, like in my situation, tend to look at death as more of just a reality or a fact of life, or like an unwelcome but necessary occurrence or a necessary end to things. It kind of manifests that way. But our best friend David Andrew, who works on a lot of our music, his wife Kellen and him were about to have their third child, and Kel was like 8.5 months pregnant, and they got a call a couple of days after Christmas, saying that before. I fucking remember. No, it was a couple of days afterwards. And I got a call from a friend of ours, and basically she told me that Kel had lost the baby, and I think we were all pretty angry at that because, you know, it's 8.5 months into this pregnancy. She's about to have the kid. Like, she's like this, you know, she's like this fully formed, like, kind of person. And Dave and Kel are really, really, really Christian, and they belong to this, you know, this huge fucking, this Christian community that I grew up in. And I think that song is about me trying to deal with the realities of like, a friend losing a child and that friend still staying so deeply devoted and involved with not only the faith community, but committed to the idea that God is still looking out for them and God still has their best interests and their well-being at heart. And I think that was like a really strange thing, learning how to grieve for the death of a child with the child's father and being more angry and more upset than I feel like her parents were. And that was a really strange, humbling and humiliating thing in fact. So that song's just sort of about me trying to figure out, you know, how to navigate the situation, but also about a conversation with her dad that changed my fucking life. You know, like how could I sit there and be so angry and rueful and furious at God when like the child's father, Emmy Grace, her name was, her father was so dignified and poised, and that was like a strange thing to me, like how differently the grief affected us.
Yeah, I think, I mean, first of all, a song about a conversation. I love that you wrote a song about a conversation that affected you, because it's not something that, not like going right into it and not talking about the events at all, but like that's not my grief, you know. I want to talk about it's like a song about a conversation, you know. Conversations, well, I mean, one of the reasons why I do the show is that conversations really change our lives, whether they're conversations that we like might hear from,
had like a zillion conversations with like lecturers and mentors that made your life, you know.
Yeah, exactly. But we don't really give those the airtime as we give of like, this album changed my life, this book changed my life, this blah 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 changed my life. But actually, this thing that's moving into our lives and every day, these conversations can like totally you know, turn things around. There's a line from Rudolf Steiner where he says, conversation will become the new Eucharist, like that we, and we're filming on Whitsun or Pentecost actually today.
Oh, really?
But, yeah, so, but this idea that when we listen and when we hear, it's like someone might come at you for saying, you were in pain when this, but of course you were, like, of course we feel these feelings when we hear about other people suffering, and just like that's an interaction, you know. And then to be brought through those feelings by a conversation and then subsequently writing a song about that, I think is really beautiful, and it's like a rare thing.
Well, I think conversations are humanity's way of negotiating the difficulties of life without having to do anything, in a weird way. Does that make sense? Like the way that I interact with someone else is a response to the world around us, you know. Like, so instead of turning toward, you know, I don't know, drinking or playing the piano, you turn toward another human being and you exchange your essence, you exchange your ideas, you exchange words. Words have a lot of power, they have a lot of like, they carry a lot of weight. And so I think that's our way of making sense of the world, with another person also trying to make sense of the world. And I think that's the crux of why conversations can be either so profound or so traumatizing.
It's also why I say, like, sex, like when I talk about sex and talk about it in terms of it being a conversation, it's more like conversation than anything else. Sometimes it can be terrible, sometimes it can be boring, sometimes it can be okay, sometimes it can change your life, right? But the idea being that you keep going at it anyway, and even if, like, say you had a boring or shitty conversation with someone, you still might have another conversation with them, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
and it's also, it's free. It can go anywhere. It has free meaning. It can go anywhere. It can go. I mean, sometimes we pay for sex, but it can go anywhere. It can go in any direction.
And then there are boundaries to it as well, like things that you respect, or like
or maybe like we don't always know those boundaries until we hit them,
and then we realize, oh fuck yeah.
Yeah, right. And so,
and if you keep hitting that boundary and like on purpose, and then that becomes like a bad conversation, you know.
Right. And we wouldn't want to talk to somebody that kept like pushing. And so I think, you know, for me, I talk about it that way because I want people to think of it not as necessarily this case that has nothing else analogous to it in life, but actually it is a way of having a conversation with someone.
Sex isn't fucking communion, you know. It's not like it's not like you don't go through this process of Eucharistic kind of like interaction. It's like it's something way less to me, it always felt like sex and conversation, like, it needs to feel way less holy in order for it to be more relatable and human in a weird way.
Yeah, you have to understand that. You have to understand how completely everyday it is before you understand what's sacred about it, right? Yeah. You have to be almost like a sex atheist before you can understand what's like sacred and profound in it. Yeah. And I think that's also this this idea that you can use it to meet people, you can seek it for many different reasons as well. Like, we tend to think, oh, you just need to do it because you are in love with somebody, or to make a baby, or whatever, or because like, you're in a loving relationship with someone. But actually, we have conversations because we want a job. We have conversations because we're bored. We have conversations because we pity somebody. You know, like, there are lots of reasons to do, and we would never place that demand on it. And so that's why also I talk about it that way. But just to bring it back to the song and the intensity of the sadness and all that, I want to go deeper into those moods, because it's something that you and I have both experienced in our lives, which is like, to call it sadness would be a misnomer. It's not sadness. Depression, affliction is what Simone Weil calls it sometimes. These other...
It's like a very poetic way to put it, affliction.
So...
because it feels like a disease in a weird way when you talk about like it being an affliction, like something that you're stricken with. It just seems like such a poetic way to put something.
But it is. I mean, she was talking about sort of a certain kind of mood and depression, but disease is right. It's like when I try to explain depression to people, I say it's like when you tell someone who's depressed to not be depressed, it's like telling someone in a wheelchair to stand up and run around. Yeah. You have a disability that is actually makes impossible, although temporarily, makes impossible the thing that you would want to do and want to enact.
It's also one of those things where like there are certain components of what we call healthy living that do assist in some way, but you can't just go out and get fucking exercise and eat well. That doesn't change anything in a drastic way that's noticeable over time. It's like, I mean, so much about mankind, I don't want to say mankind, like humankind, like every like people kind is like...
You've been reading too many of those 19th century philosophers that are like, man must
mankind. Yeah, I mean, like, I was thinking that, I'm like, but it's just like there are people that are men. I just think that like in our constant state of flux, misery is the only like perpetual standard, and I think like there's so much of that because like we're the default on. Because I feel very, very confident that humanity doesn't default on elation very often. And what I do feel confident is that, I was talking about these unifying human experiences, and most of them revolved around grief and suffering and sadness and what you said, disability.
But I think that's a work we can do. So when you talk about the sort of duty of art, what if instead like we begin? So this is like a common thing. It's like we come together in suffering, but we demonize each other for the ways that we seek pleasure and joy and love.
Yeah, we shit on each other for trying to find some amendment inside. Yeah.
And now I'm seeing more and more that we actually can't even understand each other's pain, which is very alarming. Although maybe that's giving something to us too. I don't want to just say that nothing positive is coming out of that. But part of maybe this work of art is to. And whatever else is to start seeing, maybe we can begin to relate to each other in pleasure and joy as well. Because that's what happens when people go to a concert without them realizing it. They all go and see this band playing really sad songs together, really angry songs together, and they're having a fucking amazing time.
Yeah, and they're locked in. They're like I used the word communion before as well. They're locked in like a communion with each other and the artist. I think that's a really beautiful. I think that's a really beautiful cathartic way to look at live performance, for example, specifically. Right. A bunch of people reveling in the misery of I remember seeing Leonard Cohen and just being everyone was just so sad but so joyous. The guy who brought so much sadness and pain into their lives is there in front of them.
Right.
That was I think that's a really underrated element of the unifying, bonding power of what rock and roll, at least the redemptive, atoning power of rock and roll in that sense.
It's something about becoming people who can appreciate the not liking, to appreciate the feeling. it's not just love your pain, that's fine, but not that, but to say like I want to understand, I want to engage with these
you don't
intensities.
you want there to be an absence of knowing that pain. Like I think a lot of what music is doing now is trying to dispel pain, or trying to, like, at least mainstream pop music is trying to like pretend it's not there, or like, oh, it's just, I'm all sad and shit, so I'm gonna go and fucking listen to whatever or do whatever bullshit that is kind of an Instagram worthy, culturally approved notion of like dealing with stuff, whereas like I think it's important to know the pain, to understand it, to interact with it, to engage with it, to turn it into something, to the Rumpelstiltskin thing, to turn it to weave it into gold, and for lack of a better cliche.
But I mean, it's interesting that pop music is like the only ways that they do that is one. It's like empowerment music, like like I'm so empowered, like I can do whatever, or
often we're not that empowered.
No,
we're
right?
not like
totally.
Not empowered,
yeah, like you broke up with me, but fuck you, I'm in control here. Like,
whereas clearly that's like the exact reaction. Every
exactly.
sad person who got dumped is like, no, fuck you, man. Like,
right,
you're
right,
clearly
and
not,
that's an
like,
exhibition of pain,
exactly,
by being so vacuous that like no emotive anything shows up at
man.
all.
Well,
but then it's more alarming to me too, because it's like you have people feeling pain around things that are not painful, like just being serious and thoughtful. And so music and other kinds of art become detached from history. They become aphilosophical, anti-intellectual, all that kind of stuff, because like people are experiencing seriousness as discomfort, and now people are experiencing discomfort as suffering.
Well, it's interesting how we've confused the idea that being just like feeling uncomfortable in a very secure environments, we consider that analogous to like actual legitimate horrifying suffering.
Right.
It's really strange. Like, I mean, suffering is, like I said, suffering is a persisting measure in our existence, right? All of us suffer something, whether it be small or large. But I think learning how to differentiate between like us just feeling vaguely or extremely uncomfortable in our surroundings, it's kind of magnifying and amplifying that into to a level where it's like this overwhelming sense of, oh god, the pain is just really strange to me. And I think like I have a habit of doing that. I think the first album was definitely a lot of me doing that.
Well, I mean, I think that there's also like there's something going on. I've talked about this in the show in many different episodes, where people feel that they won't be heard in their pain unless they claim intense and total victimhood. So it's like what it should be is someone says, I'm in pain, I'm not traumatized, I'm not totally fucked up about it, but I'm in pain, can someone help me? And people say, yes, we're here to support you.
Instead
but
of it's like you need to be the most pain in order for anyone to give a shit, which is like, I think like trying to work to reverse that is pretty important. Like just caring about the Joycean, the James Joyce, like caring about the little insignificant mundanities that make your life either great or really shitty, like caring about those kind of small, seemingly insignificant things that do contribute to an overwhelming sense of like Weltschmerz or weariness or whatever. Yeah,
well, and so that brings me a little more deeply, I think, to the depression stuff.
Yeah.
Because of this, I want to talk with you about depression and actually just have like just a real talk about depression for people to hear, right? Because it's been on my mind so much. I've actually been in a pretty good place, but for me, I'll just talk personally about this. I haven't really talked that much about it publicly, but I've had really intense depression since I was a teenager. It's been suicidal depression that like, it's like it would be like every 3 days, it would be like just this intensity of like, just fucking kill yourself. Right. And I would just stumble through that and somehow got through, but nothing worked. I went to therapy. I had alternative therapies. I took every fucking SSRI you could think of. Nothing even touched it. Nothing came close. I took antipsychotic medication for it to see if it would do anything. But actually all that did was I couldn't imagine things. Like someone would say like, imagine a cat. And I'd be like, I can't. Yeah. And so I went through all of that. And then eventually something that made it all go away, although it's returned since, but something made it go away for a good like 4 years was my mentor, Lynn Margulies, who's she's a world famous scientist, right? She died. She was like my second mom. So she died, and I was meditating at the time, and she started appearing to me in this meditative state. Wow. And my depression and anxiety went away for years. Yeah. And if you can imagine, it's like, you know, finding out, you know, your chronic disease condition has gone away. The world was entirely new to me. So even though it's returned after a few years of it being gone, I now have sort of new eyes for the world.
Do you feel like you have like kind of new tools to know how to like move through it and deal with it, or is it kind of like still going to be? I
think having seen the world in the light without it, yeah. I'm like, oh, that remains still a wellspring of strength for me, even though I'm not in that like I was like walking around smiling every second, but I can still do that now, yeah. and every once in a while. But the thing is, I learned from that too, that people who are hopeless, you know, in their depression or their mental illness or whatever, that maybe the strangest thing will, if you endure, maybe the strangest, most unexpected thing will release you from it. You know, you don't know, just as people don't know how to necessarily deal with it or cure it or whatever, you also don't know what might release you from it. I had no clue that was going to happen. And it was incredible and changed my life.
I think part of the reason why I always tell people to just hold on for another day is because that exact reason. You don't know what kind of redemptive moment or redemptive process will occur in the future. Like, and I think the fact that I always used to think that because I'm unsure I should kill myself, right? But I think the fact that I'm unsure should be motivation to stay alive, to see what happens next.
Yes.
You know, like to see what happens next, to see what potentially could make my existence bearable, you know? And I think like if I had offed myself, or like if I'd succeeded in offing myself the times that I did, I wouldn't have met my wife caught. I wouldn't be able to work in a job where I genuinely believe that I might have the potential to help somebody, to care about somebody in a way that actually matters, to do things, you know, with my money that are responsible and like ethical and helping to some degree. You know, I like to exist in a world where like the words that I write are giving people hope to face another fucking day. There was a chance that I couldn't do that. I couldn't make some contributions, couldn't live beyond whatever this shell, this casing had for me before that. And I think that's like, for me at least, and I don't know if it's for everybody, I can't speak for it. For me, just the idea of like, just wait until see what happens next.
Yes, and I think that you know, for me, another like a profound moment as I started experiencing depression again, but after I'd sort of gone through that calm, was like, okay, so after that, I was like, okay, a reincarnation or the afterlife or whatever, there's something going on there for me, and I'm not going to impose that view on anybody. But when I began to think, okay, so if I kill myself, it's because I've confused myself with my body, which my body is an aspect of me, but it's not all of me, but I've confused myself with it. And like when I die, I'm still going to have the pain because this is psychic pain. It's not just bodily. So like,
it doesn't exist. It's not like you have a sore foot. You're right. Like there's something in the soul that is.
And I've like cut myself off from one of the only things that might have been able to help me through it. Right. So like, I don't experience the existence of hell, but it's like if, you know, I remove myself from this thing, this body, then what chance do I have of alleviating the pain when like at least this can give me pleasure, right? And all that.
No, but there's also like it's this notion of like we believe that our essence can be ended just by stopping our heart,
right?
You know, and if we believe in like for people who believe in the existence of a soul or a spirit or consciousness beyond what we perceive as a material reality here, like. Yeah, you can't just end the physical body's ability to live and expect that shit's going to end in the next whatever.
Right.
You know, or you just see black. And for me, the idea of seeing black at that point felt like maybe a waste. And it's a strange thing. Like I completely agree with what you're saying. Like the idea that our bodies provide some kind of earthly. You know, like we taste, we see, we make love, we hug, we run, we exercise, we see beautiful things with this body, you know. And I think the way to interpret depression for me became an exercise in like finding places that I could find hope, places that I could find a semblance of like like a life raft or a fucking, what do you call this? Like a life jacket, but like,
Yeah,
you know, those,
like
those rings.
They're called lifesavers.
Lifesavers, yeah. And I think moving through life sometimes is, especially if you suffer depression, I've got like the whole host of I've got the whole gamut of like things that a doctor could tell you that you have like mental illness wise, but sometimes it just has to be that you need to go through life making sure you're being accountable to people about your feelings and about like what's going on inside, and embracing relationships and embracing like, you know, positive life choices, and that's sometimes the only thing that you can really do. And it's hard. It's not, you can't just cure depression, you know, by all this stuff, but like finding ways to help is really, really fucking important. And I always think like there's this attitude in society, which I actually don't want to talk about, it's gonna be controversial, that somehow you're a fucking coward or you're a selfish asshole if you kill yourself, or you like, and I think I would like to challenge that and say sometimes the total opposite is true. You know, I think it takes a lot of courage to make a choice that extraordinary and that devastating. I think there's something really, you know, I think there's something really deeply wrong with the attitude that we have towards to
suicide.
Suicide, yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, I think part of our like very Western attachment to the sanctity of life, in this very like Judeo-Christian sense, probably has a lot to do with it. But I think like the one thing that I always knew is that people would be hurt by my suicide. We're all aware of it. Anyone who's faced depression is aware of how their depression or how they feel affects those around them. We're all aware for the most part. We don't need to be constantly reminded of it. You know, it's just a lot of the time we can't help it. And
I think that for me, it weirdly, this will sound, suicide is a survival strategy in a way. It's like the only thing that made me able to get through was knowing that I could stop. Yeah. It's like knowing that that I could get out. Yeah. It was like that kept me going so many times, honestly, which sounds so bizarre because it's an inverse.
Dude, honestly, like I remember there was a time when I would have to like fantasize about killing myself to get to sleep. Like that's fucking morbid, but sometimes it's like the avenue of being able to envision a place where you're not dealing with this shit on a constant fucking daily basis can be a source of refuge and a source of like, maybe not strength, but a source of I don't know, like maybe a source of courage in a weird way to keep facing it, knowing that there's an end. And I think the way that we look at suicide has to move from like, you know, it has to move from this very judgmental place, because often like suicide is met with a lot of judgment, and I think it's starting to happen, like, you know, starting to happen a little bit more, to a place of like understanding and like an acknowledgement that the human condition is not one that can be defined in terms of like always right and wrong, but sometimes there are fucking real grey areas sometimes. And I think like suicide and depression is a fucking grey area in and of itself. Like for me it was a grey area, because in escaping, because you know, for suicide for me, in escaping one horrifying reality, I would just create another one, another horrifying reality to those I love. And
I mean, I think so there's so much to talk about with what you're saying, but one of the things is, yes, when you're suicidal, I would say most people, I can't speak for everybody, but who have felt suicidal feelings or are genuinely suicidal, that they know that it would affect other people. But people, we don't accept as a culture that by demanding nobody kill themselves, we're affecting the people who are suicidal.
Exactly that. We're expecting someone to keep holding on
to live in constant chronic pain. And that's why I want to talk with you about this, because I want to describe what it feels like to be depressed, or feels like to be suicidal, because what people think is they hear you and I talking about this and they're like, oh, they're suicidal, they must have thought about killing themselves because life was hard. No, that's not what it's like at all. It's actually, I'll detail my experience and you can tell me if it's similar. But it's like the thoughts, whatever trigger, it could be triggered by many different things, and sometimes I can't identify the trigger, sometimes I can, but it starts sort of attaching all my thoughts to it and all my feelings to it. In other words, it becomes this overwhelming demand. Imagine if you were standing at the edge of a cliff, and you know that feeling you get where you're like, what if I just jumped, right? Yeah. It's like that feeling,
it's like
except
it's compulsion, right?
Yes, except it starts to attach itself to every single thought you have, every feeling that you have. Everything in your life becomes colored by this fact that it was either, I could describe many different ways. Like, there's a failure, it's never going to get better, it's always terrible. But here's this thing you could do. You could make this jump, and all that pain would go away.
Would dissipate at least, or would like fizzle out.
That's what it feels like in the experience. It's overwhelming, it's commanding, and it crowds everything else out. It's like gosh, I feel like I talked about this in the last episode, but like a cuckoo lays its egg in another bird's nest, and then when it hatches, it kicks all the other fledglings out of the nest, and the mother bird ends up feeding the cuckoo. And like, that's what it feels like. Like, this thing is growing in you, and you're constantly tending to it, but there's no choice, and there's no room for the other things that you'd intended.
Yeah, because everything just gets enveloped or inhabited by this fucking idea that like, or not this idea that's like, it's like a virus, weird, like a
possession or being.
I mean, it's so weird. You talk about the discursiveness of what it does. Discursiveness means it attaches us to one thought, another thought, another thought. So every thought related to one thought is polluted by this other, by this thing. And so, for example, I could be thinking about like, oh, my cell phone, and then I find a way to relate cell phone back to like being depressed and like feeling overwhelmed with this sense of wanting to end the depression. And then I could move to like, oh, what I ate for food today. And then I'll be like, oh, you shouldn't have eaten, you don't deserve to eat. Just weird fucking shit like that. It's sort of something that kind of like in Stranger Things, right? That big kind of like alien that kind of inhabits the consciousness of this young boy, but then, you know, it starts to manifest itself in the actual world out from this what they call it?
Whatever. It's called the upside down.
The upside down, yeah. It's really weird. It starts to seep in from the upside down into like every kind of thought, and it becomes a discursive process of trying to like eliminate the depressive thoughts with other depressive thoughts. Then because you begin to identify so intensely with that presence. And so something that I've done as a strategy is say, you're not me. Like, I actually end up talking to it, and that for me, it comes out of my sort of occultist spiritual view. So I'm like, you're not me, and so that can cause its own, I'm not saying that doesn't bring its own host of problems to me, but when I start saying you're not me, I think you're trying to help me, but you're not helping. And I start talking to it. Now, someone might think I was crazy, but doing that also can help, especially in the early moments, can really help me from spiraling and becoming completely seized by this weird presence, so to speak.
Exactly.
And it also humanizes the problem. You know, it kind of makes it seem like an accessible, like day-to-day, like issue. Like, I have to cut my toenails or whatever. Oh, I have to also make sure that I talk to the depression. You know? It's one of those things. It's like having to talk to your fucking landlord sometimes. Maybe that's a really like vulgar way to put it, but like what I'm trying to say is like people deal with this as an everyday reality, and I think the more open we are about talking about and being open about depression and, you know, and relating it to like the real everydayness, it sort of takes the morbidity out of it.
Yeah,
you know, it also takes the fucking like. I don't know if this is a great solution, but I genuinely believe we can fucking save lives by being able to talk about it frankly, to be frank about it.
100%.
And I think that's what we're trying to do, right? Like, we're trying to endeavor to make sure that people feel comfortable.
Because it's talked about,
save lives.
Yes, and it's talked about in a certain way. So like if you talk about depression or suicidal thoughts or whatever, our culture everyone expresses that in a certain way and a very limited kind of language. So what I would experience was like, okay, well, I hear that other people are depressed, but that doesn't sound like what I'm experiencing. So this must be singular and I must be alone in it. But in fact, when I start talking with other people, having open dialogues, I can see where they overlap. And the thing is, I think everybody's depression actually is unique, right? Everybody's personality is unique. But you find these places where they overlap, and some people you can have these conversations with and learn skills and coping. And other people, it's like, well, I think you're going through a different thing than I am.
Sure.
But we at least know the inability to just sort of change, because people think it's inward, it's an inner disease, it's an inner, they're just making that up, it's just in their head or whatever, but it is.
Which is in and of itself has its own problematic,
it's
weird
crazy
cultural thing.
But
like it's
crazy.
This is what I talk about the binding uniform like human experiences, and a lot of them tend to revolve around grief, a lot of them tend to revolve around suffering, I always think about how musicians are so susceptible to this kind of thing, how creative people, creative like performers, artists, actors, musicians, we're all so susceptible to this thing. And I think maybe it's because we relate to the world using instincts, and we navigate the world with almost spirit first in a weird way. We kind of run using empathy, or using, a lot of artists aren't empaths at all, they're fucking sociopaths.
But it may be that we're touching, or even that the depression is a way in some sense to touch that, whether you're calling it universality or I'm calling it a spiritual aspect or whatever, it may actually be that that's sort of a pathway, which is also why people have trouble giving it up. Like, people become so identified, they're like, oh, but my art's going to suck if I give it up. And it's like, well, first of all, like,
you don't have to be horrible you don't have to be in a horrible way to make good shit. I mean,
right. Well, and also, like, how good is your art right now? Like, if we're talking that your art is like Shakespeare, okay, let's have that conversation about whether or not you should get healthy or not. But if it's like, if it's at the kind of like Twitterverse, like, 150 followers, I've made this thing and it's on like my my Etsy, like, maybe you want to get a little healthier and see what transforms.
Well, it's also it's not the sadness that makes good art. It's the courage of the person with the sadness.
Yes, exactly.
I hate this fucking shit. Like, you need to be high, you need to be in a bad place, you need to do drugs. Like, fuck that shit, man.
It's bullshit.
If you have the ability to create, you are in a good position to create something good. And I think when a lot of people are in a bad way, they don't have inhibition when they make work. I think that's probably true. I think when you're less inhibited, but I think like, you don't have to be feeling shitty. You just have to have courage. You just have to have conviction and courage, and that's the fucking most important thing.
Or I think, and the word I would use for it is coherence. It's like what allows you to live with, create with, engage with, and sort of store in some ways the intensities that you experience, whether it's through depression or just through everyday life shit. Like, you have someone like David Lynch, he's the example I always turn to, who is this person who's dedicated his life to making the world a better place through meditation and spread that throughout the world, but also will make the darkest, scariest, truly almost evil in some ways art.
No, but like Blue Velvet, man. Blue Velvet's fucking...
Sure. Yeah. And so
that was filmed in my wife's house, by the way.
Oh, really?
Wilmington,
Oh, man. Yeah. Well, I'm going to talk to her about that. Yeah. But I think, like, just this idea of how do you create a coherent world that contains all of these things instead of just trying to completely either flee from it or indulge in it? What does that look like? Okay, so to close out our show about depression and suicidalness, you're going to play a very cheery song by Leonard Cohen. Yeah. And it's a song that, whether or not you know a lot of Leonard Cohen songs, you know this one because it's fucking awesome.
Yeah, it's a good one.
All right, so I'll let you get to it. Everybody, I'm going to let him close it out. So thank you for watching and listening and dealing with my face being half cut, my beautiful face being cut in two.
It is a very beautiful face.
Oh, thank you.
I'm sorry for breaking that. To everyone who's here, just to look at Connor, I fucked it up.
Well, and now more than ever, I need your support on Patreon. Patreon.com/Connor Habib.
Sorry.
All right, I'll let you get to it, man.
I remember you well in the Chelsea hotel. You were talking so brave and so sweet. You were giving me head on the unmade bed while the limousines wait in the street. But those were the reasons. That was New York. We were running for the money and the flesh. That was called love for the workers, and some probably still is for those of them left. And I remember you well in the Chelsea hotel. You were famous, your heart was a legend. And you told me again that you preferred handsome men, but for me you would make an exception. And clenching your fist for the ones like us who are oppressed by the figures of beauty. You fixed yourself. You said, well, never mind, we are ugly, but we have the music. Ah, but you got away, ah, didn't you, baby? You just turned your back on the crowd. Oh, and you got away, I never once heard you say that I need you, I don't need you, I need you, I don't need you. And all that driving around, I don't mean to suggest that I loved you the best. I don't keep track of each fallen robin. Oh, but I remember you well in the Chelsea Hotel. That's all, I don't even think of you that often.
Very excited to start this episode. And Dave's we're gonna talk. Le AUPEPE.
Little Pepe.
Le AUPEPE. Okay. All right.